The Lonely Rancher. Elena Dawson rose with the first pale light filtering through the wooden slats of her farmhouse window. The silence of the ranch pressed against her like a tangible weight, broken only by the distant lowing of cows and the creak of the windmill outside. Each morning she performed the same ritual. Feed the livestock, check the fences, inspect the fields. Yet despite the work, a hollow ache lingered in her chest. Loneliness had become a companion she could not shake. The ranch had been in her family for generations, passed down from her parents, who had died when she was just a teenager. Since then, she had poured every ounce of herself into maintaining it, forging a life of independence and quiet resilience. But independence had its price. She had never married, never had children, and the emptiness of her sprawling home now felt suffocating. After breakfast, Elena mounted her horse and rode into town to sell her produce. The town streets bustled with families and neighbors exchanging greetings and laughter. She smiled politely at passers-by, yet an unspoken pang settled in her chest as she observed the children running past, clutching their parents' hands. A longing she had tried to bury surfaced, an ache for a family of her own, for warmth she had never known. At the edge of the square stood the Reed estate, an imposing manor that seemed to shimmer with prosperity and refinement. It was home to Thomas Reed and his wife, Sophia, whose lives had always seemed far removed from Elena's rugged existence. Today, the Reeds were hosting a small gathering. Elena caught sight of them through the open gate, surrounded by laughter and the glow of lanterns. Sophia's elegance contrasted sharply with the simplicity of Elena's life, while Thomas moved among the guests with an easy charm that made the air between him and the world feel effortless. Elena's heart tightened at the sight, not out of envy, but a strange, unbidden pull she could not explain. As she arranged her baskets at the market stall, Thomas approached, his presence both commanding and gentle. "Morning, Elena," he said, voice measured, polite, yet warm. Their fingers brushed briefly as he handed her the payment for her produce, and she felt a sudden awareness of her own pulse. She forced a smile, focusing on the coins in her hand rather than the spark of connection that had flashed between them. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, yet her mind churned with thoughts she could not easily dismiss. Why did the thought of Thomas stir something within her that no one else ever had? Why did the sight of his calm, confident presence feel like a beacon in the emptiness of her life? She shook her head, berating herself for entertaining such dangerous musings. He was married. She was alone. Desire and propriety clashed violently within her, leaving her unsettled. Evening descended, painting the fields with streaks of amber and rose. Elena performed her nightly chores mechanically, yet her heart was restless. She paused by the fence, watching her livestock settle into the pens, the wind rustling the dry grass in gentle whispers. Memories of her parents' voices, now long gone, mingled with her unspoken yearning. She wanted more than solitude. She wanted connection, family, someone to share the silence and the labor with. And in that quiet, unguarded moment, the thought of Thomas returned, not as a fleeting curiosity, but as a profound, unsettling desire. By the time she entered the farmhouse, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo, and the first stars shimmered faintly above. She lit a lantern, casting a soft glow over the room, and sat at the small wooden table where she often dined alone. Her diary lay open before her, a faithful witness to her innermost thoughts. With a trembling hand, she began to write, "I am so tired of being alone. I long for warmth, for someone who sees me. Not just the ranch, not just the work. Could it be him? But how can I even think such a thing?" The words felt dangerous, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. Elena closed the diary and leaned back, the weight of her longing pressing against her chest. Outside, the ranch lay silent under the star-studded sky, indifferent to human hearts. But inside, a spark had ignited, a quiet, persistent flame of desire that would not be easily extinguished. For the first time in years, Elena felt the stirrings of something new, something forbidden, something that might finally bring color to the muted monotony of her life. And though fear accompanied it, a strange courage took root. The chapter of loneliness that had defined her existence was shifting quietly, inexorably. Something, or someone, was about to change everything. Forbidden attraction. 800 words. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in a soft, golden light that filtered through the tall pines lining the perimeter. Elena moved through her daily chores with mechanical precision, yet her thoughts were elsewhere, on the brief encounter with Thomas Reed the day before. The memory of his hand brushing hers lingered, a spark she could not ignore. Each glance at the town beyond the hills seemed to whisper possibilities she had never dared to imagine. By midday, she saddled her horse and rode toward the town once more, this time under the guise of borrowing supplies. The dusty road stretched before her, and with each hoofbeat, her anticipation grew. Arriving at the Reed estate, she lingered near the edge of the property, careful to remain unseen. Thomas appeared, adjusting a tool on the porch, and the world seemed to shrink around him. She drew in a quiet breath, steadying herself, yet her heart pounded with both excitement and guilt. Thomas noticed her almost immediately. "Elena," he said, a faint warmth in his tone, as he approached the fence. His eyes, briefly meeting hers, conveyed a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. He offered assistance with the tool she had requested, their fingers brushing once more as she took a hammer from him. That fleeting contact sent an unbidden shiver through her spine. She chastised herself silently, aware of the boundaries she was crossing, yet unable to quell the yearning that had taken root. The conversation was polite, casual even, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Thomas's voice held subtle undertones of familiarity, a softness she had not expected from a man so composed. Elena felt drawn to him, not just by desire, but by the rare kindness he offered without pretense. It was dangerous, she knew. He was married, and she had no right to feel this way. But in his presence, her loneliness seemed to dissolve, replaced by a heady, intoxicating connection. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Elena retreated to the small garden behind her farmhouse. She poured her thoughts into her diary, the ink capturing both longing and restraint. "I know it is wrong. I know he is married. And yet, when he smiles, it feels like the world shifts. I have never felt so alive and terrified at the same time." Each word was a confession to herself, a secret she could share with no one. Evening brought unexpected tension. Sophia Reed had sent a brief message requesting Elena's assistance with a minor errand, delivering fresh produce to their kitchen. It was a simple task, yet it brought her uncomfortably close to Thomas again. Inside the grand, shadowed kitchen, she and Thomas exchanged fleeting glances while Sophia bustled around, unaware of the unspoken connection simmering between them. Elena's pulse quickened as she placed the baskets on the counter, aware that every small gesture, the way she handed over the produce, the casual touch of her fingers against his, was amplified in meaning. That night, Elena walked the perimeter of her ranch under a sky smeared with stars, the wind stirring the dry grass at her feet. Her mind replayed the moments with Thomas, the stolen smiles and the brief touch of hands. Each memory was both a thrill and a torment. She questioned herself. Was she imagining more than there was? Or was this undeniable chemistry, a forbidden spark that neither time nor propriety could extinguish? In her solitude, Elena allowed herself a small indulgence, imagining a life where she and Thomas could be together, where loneliness was replaced with the warmth of shared existence. The thought made her heart ache with both desire and guilt. She pictured quiet mornings on the porch, hands brushing as they carried out daily chores together, laughter mingling with the wind. And then reality intruded. Sophia, the boundaries of morality, the very real consequences that could shatter everything. Returning to the farmhouse, Elena paused at her doorway, gazing at the horizon where the sun had finally disappeared behind the distant hills. The ranch lay quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of trees and the occasional call of a night bird. Yet within her, a storm of emotions raged. Longing, guilt, hope, and fear intertwined in a complex knot she could not unravel. Sitting by the fireplace with her diary open once more, she scribbled her thoughts with a trembling hand. I cannot stop thinking about him. I try to tell myself it is impossible, but my heart refuses to listen. I feel alive, yet I am on the edge of everything I have known. What am I becoming? The candle flickered, casting shadows across the walls, and Elena closed her diary with a sigh. She understood, more clearly than ever, that her life was no longer confined to routine and solitude. Something, or someone, had crossed into her world, challenging every notion of right and wrong. And with that realization came both fear and exhilaration. The spark had been lit, and there was no turning back. The plea. The ranch lay shrouded in early morning mist, the air cool against Elena's skin as she moved along the fence line. Her mind was restless, a tumult of emotions she could no longer contain. The memory of Thomas's smile, the warmth in his eyes, haunted her every thought. She had tried to push it aside, convince herself it was fleeting, yet the connection between them had grown undeniable, an ember now threatening to ignite into flames. Elena rode toward the town under the pretense of delivering fresh eggs to the Reeds. Each hoofbeat against the packed earth seemed to echo the rapid pulse of her heart. Today, she told herself, she would speak. Not casually, not through letters or stolen glances. She would voice the truth that had been gnawing at her for weeks. The thought filled her with both courage and terror. Arriving at the edge of the Reed estate, she paused, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Thomas was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes, his movements methodical, precise, yet somehow unguarded in a way reserved for those he trusted. Elena's hands tightened around the basket of eggs, the simple object suddenly heavy with significance. She cleared her throat softly, and Thomas looked up, his gaze meeting hers. There was a hesitation there, a flicker of recognition that mirrored her own apprehension. "Elena," he said, voice low, measured, carrying the weight of unspoken words. She felt a jolt. His calm, restrained presence only amplified the storm within her. She set the basket down, fingers brushing against his as she handed it over. The contact lingered for a heartbeat too long, and she felt herself tremble under the intensity of it. Elena began, then faltered. The words she had rehearsed all morning refused to align properly, as if the very air conspired against her confession. She took a steadying breath and tried again. "I cannot stop thinking about you. I know it is wrong, but I cannot hide it anymore. Please consider me." Her plea was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried all the weight of her longing, her vulnerability laid bare. Thomas froze, his hand hovering midair. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant crow of a rooster, the gentle sway of the roses in the breeze. He struggled visibly, torn between duty and desire, between the life he had built and the spark that Elena had awakened in him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then exhaled slowly, a sigh that carried both frustration and longing. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of both hope and fear. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. Yet speaking her truth had lifted a weight she had carried in silence for far too long. Her eyes lingered on Thomas's hands, the subtle way he shifted his stance, the quiet tension radiating from him. Every small movement spoke volumes, and every unspoken word tightened the knot of their connection. Footsteps echoed from the manor, faint but deliberate. Sophia's presence was a reminder of the boundaries they had violated, the danger hovering at the edge of their fragile bubble. Elena's chest tightened. The reality of the situation pressed against her, heavy and unrelenting. She had no illusions. This plea could ignite a tempest, but the alternative, to remain silent, had become unbearable. Thomas finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "Elena, This is complicated. The hesitation, the falter, revealed his inner conflict more clearly than words ever could. He stepped back slightly, a subtle distance, yet his eyes lingered on hers with an intensity that spoke of unspoken longing, of desires restrained but not extinguished. Elena nodded, her lips pressed together to hold back the tremor of fear and anticipation. She understood him without needing further explanation. She had crossed a line, yet in doing so, she had exposed a truth that could no longer be denied. She turned slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, and allowed the quiet to stretch between them. No resolution, no promises, only the acknowledgement of something that existed, undeniable and dangerous. As she departed the garden, the morning sun began to pierce the mist, illuminating the path back to her ranch. The weight of her confession lingered, yet she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. The spark had been ignited, and though the consequences remained uncertain, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Her life was no longer bound by solitude. Something profound had shifted, and there was no returning to the way things had been. The ranch welcomed her back with its familiar silence, the fences and fields indifferent to the storms of the heart. Yet Elena felt a subtle change in the air, a tremor in the wind that whispered possibilities. Her life, once predictable and solitary, had become a landscape of uncharted emotion. The fire of desire, dangerous yet irresistible, had begun to shape her world, and nothing, neither fear, nor guilt, nor societal bounds, could extinguish it. Consequences and choices. The dawn arrived slowly over the Dawson Ranch, painting the fields with streaks of gold and rose. Elena moved among her livestock with deliberate calm, yet the quiet did little to soothe the turmoil in her chest. Her confession to Thomas had shifted the balance of her life, and now, every sound, the distant crow of a rooster, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of the wind, seemed charged with meaning. Nothing would feel ordinary again. By mid-morning, Thomas arrived at the ranch, his presence unmistakable even from the edge of the field. Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he adjusted his hat, and the hesitation in his step. Neither spoke at first. Words seemed fragile, incapable of holding the weight of everything unspoken between them. Yet their eyes, never shown to the viewer, only implied through subtle gestures and camera angles, communicated the depths of desire, guilt, and longing. "Good morning, Elena," Thomas said quietly, the tone neutral yet layered with emotion. His hands rested loosely at his sides, betraying the struggle to maintain composure. Elena nodded, her fingers clutching a basket of feed with a tension that mirrored his own. Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric, until she finally spoke. "I don't expect anything," her voice trembling slightly. "I only needed you to know." Thomas shifted, running a hand across his face, a faceless gesture of restraint and frustration. "Elena, you've stirred something I cannot ignore," he admitted, his words carefully chosen, careful not to incite scandal, careful not to shatter lives, yet impossible to deny. Each phrase, measured and deliberate, revealed the battle raging inside him between duty and desire. Far away, Sophia moved through the halls of the Reed estate, oblivious to the exact contours of this encounter, yet sensing a subtle disturbance. A hand paused on a doorknob. A floorboard creaked, the faint sound of her presence an invisible yet pressing reminder of the boundaries they had crossed. Elena and Thomas both felt it, though neither spoke. Reality had reasserted itself, even as desire whispered of possibilities beyond morality and expectation. Elena's thoughts flickered to Lucas, her brother. How would he see her now if he knew the truth? She shook her head, forcing the consideration away. There were choices to make, hearts to guard, and consequences to navigate. For now, the space between her and Thomas held all the unspoken potential, a fragile equilibrium that could tip in any direction. The two of them worked in quiet coordination, feeding and checking the livestock, tending to the fences, simple acts made intimate by proximity and the shared weight of their secret. Hands brushed, tools passed, subtle movements loaded with tension. Every mundane gesture became a test, a negotiation of feelings they could neither fully express nor fully contain. Elena felt the pulse of her heart in every glance, every faint sigh, every hesitant step. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas finally stepped back, placing a hand briefly on the fence post, a faceless marker of restraint and contemplation. "This cannot be simple," he said. His voice was calm, yet beneath it vibrated desire and restraint in equal measure. "I need to think, to consider everything." Elena understood. No promises had been made, yet acknowledgement had been given, a spark recognized, a truth confronted. She nodded, understanding that the path ahead would be fraught, uncertain, and dangerous. Yet for the first time in years, she felt alive. Loneliness, the old constant companion, had been disrupted. There was now potential, however precarious, for connection, for warmth, for the life she had longed for. She could not ignore it, even if the world demanded she do so. As Thomas mounted his horse to leave, Elena stood at the edge of the field, watching him disappear down the dirt road. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying with it the scent of hay, earth, and the faint echo of unspoken words. She exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and an ache of longing. The encounter had changed her, irrevocably, leaving her poised between fear and anticipation. Returning to the farmhouse, Elena paused to look over the land she had tended for so long. Each fence, each field, each barn seemed transformed under the awareness of what had shifted. She picked up her diary and scribbled briefly. "I do not know where this will lead. I know the risks. Yet my heart refuses the life I have always known. Something has begun, and it cannot be undone." The day waned, the shadows stretching long across the ranch, and the world felt both vast and intimate, empty yet full of possibility. Elena stood in the doorway, the wind stirring the hem of her dress, and let herself imagine a future that had once seemed impossible, a life not of solitude, but of choice, of danger, of forbidden yet undeniable connection. The ranch remained silent, indifferent to human emotion, yet for Elena, everything had changed. She had confronted desire, faced uncertainty, and claimed a spark of truth that could not be extinguished. The consequences were yet to unfold, but for the first time, she felt the thrill of possibility coursing through her veins. The horizon glowed with the last light of day, promising that tomorrow would bring decisions, risks, and moments yet unseen. Elena Dawson, once alone, now stood at the precipice of her own desires, knowing that life, love, and longing had irrevocably intertwined, and there was no turning back.